We're recording. I'm Elsa, and do you guys want to just say your name and wave so people can recognize your face if we address you and stuff?
Hi everyone, my name is Lo.
Hi everyone, my name is David.
Hey, I'm Sol.
Hi everyone, I'm KD.
We all met through a teacher that we all were taking a course together named Achyuta Bhava from Nihilate Astrology. I'm sure people are like somewhat aware of his presence online. And then we started sort of an independent study group and just started like binge doing astrology every day. And it's been at least a year that we've all kind of been hanging out and doing astrology. And one of the things that we do most consistently is mystery charts, which is what we're gonna do today. It's super fun. We basically, does someone want to explain like just the gist of it?
We'll go around the chart, just looking at the primary signatures and trying to delineate whatever happened in this person's life, trying to figure out either who it is or as much as we can from that person's narrative, or sometimes we do even events, as we can just from the planetary placements. And we'll use a specific set of techniques for that, which are mostly, if not all, Hellenistic astrology techniques. I think all of them are going to be today Hellenistic astrology techniques. Yeah.
And so what we do is someone will have a chart and they'll research the biography and they'll blank out the name and all the time, like all the signatures. And we just slowly try to uncover the person's narrative through the astrological significance. And then at the end, we do this big reveal and everyone's like, oh my God, and it's just fun. So Sol, do you want to start with your chart?
Yeah, I can share my screen.
All right, so I can go through the way that we normally do in class, and then I'll probably ask for help if I haven't said something or seen something, but I'll just give us a general walkthrough of the chart. Does that sound good? Okay, so we've got a day chart here, the sun being placed in the 12th house, and the day team or the day planets being Jupiter and Saturn with the sun. We've got, and I'll talk a little bit more about them as well. We've got Mercury as an evening star in the helm, so it's in its joy here. And so that's playing with the day team, right? We've got a day Mercury essentially. Is that how you guys would look at it?
Oh, a night
Mercury because it's an evening star. Okay, all right, great, cool. So then we've got Jupiter in the 10th, which is going to be loud, as well as that Mars. And the Mars is in domicile, so we'll see how that Mars-Jupiter plays out. And then we've got, what was I doing, angles? Oh, just Jupiter, the day planet, and then we've got Mars in the angle as well. And then we've got Saturn, the other day planet, in a whole sign opposition to the sun. And that'll be the day team. And then the night team, Mars, which I mentioned, is in domicile in the 10th. And then we've got Venus also in domicile. So they're not rejoicing by, what do we want to call that?
Sect.
Not rejoicing by sect. So they're not rejoicing by sect because they're in the same side as the sun, but they're both placed in their domicile. So they will be strong. I don't know if we were going to go into some of the minor dignities, but Venus being at that critical degree, I think she's under Mars's face. David, maybe you can help me with that? Or
I think it was. Can someone confirm that in a table?
It's okay.
I have a table. So we're looking at 29 degrees of Taurus. It's Mars.
That's right. Yeah, Mars is, okay, cool. And then we've got Jupiter dawning on that critical degree. And I think because it's a Mars sign, it would be a Saturnine last degree. So we've got some critical last degrees happening. And then, of course, the moon, the leader of the night sect, is in the 4th house. So it's angular, it's a pivot point, a kentron. And that will be significant as well because we've got the lights being significant. And since the sun is in the 12th house, perhaps the moon will take a strong significance because the moon is more angular than the sun in this case, even though it's a day chart. We'll see how that sort of plays out.
I think that has a few primary points we can point out. Is that as you said, the moon is the angular luminary, but it's also under the earth. So there's a question here if it would express more. But as the ruler of the ascendant, I think it would perhaps show up more clearly in that person's personality or manifestation of their person into the world, the lunary characteristics. I also wanted to point out that moon is opposite and square to a few planets in other angular houses. So that is also a little prominent. And the fact that the day sect benefic is with the day sect contrary malefic means that there are some of the good things in life that come from this person's reputation, because it's the 10th house, could also lead them to some of the worst scenarios that they go through in their narrative.
That is a good point, that Jupiter, the benefic of sect, is with Mars, which is the most difficult planet in the chart. So yeah, I noticed that right away too, and I was like, this is going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And you're right, the moon being just more prominent, the ascendant ruler being in an angle, even though it's a day chart.
The first thing I noticed about the chart here was the sun and its proximity to the north node as well. Being in that difficult house and being with the north node kind of feels like a lot of longing for something that maybe is not healthy for the native or not healthy for the person.
I could definitely see that. I think it's tricky. I guess keep going.
So maybe it just is this like intense ambition that can almost be the self-undoing of the 12th house, of just like, maybe it's even just like working yourself to the bone, or just the pressure you put on yourself to sort of achieve could be really strong too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think just thinking more in terms of the person's like history. I mean, every time I see a sun in the 12th house, and especially with one of the nodes, it's always like daddy issues, like, you know, like a really bad story with like the father who was like, maybe just wasn't there, or just was like an alcoholic, or had like an abusive relationship in some way. And then obviously a lot of that longing comes through that absence of the father figure in some way in the person's life, and becomes like something that determines them quite a bit in terms of what they do and how they want to achieve things. And especially since the sun is applying to a sextile with that Mars in the 10th, you're really going to see that signature of the sun, and that ambition, that like craving for to manifest that solar energy, like really coming into like that really visible space of the 10th house.
And because Jupiter is with that Mars, it validates the opinion of the sun, because it's also exalting the sun in Aries, to make that Martian, you know, make way for me kind of happen for this person. And then they would gain a lot of notoriety, prominence, but it's also, as I said, because it's the malefic contrary to the sect, probably what leads to the person's downfall as well, right? And what you guys were saying with the self,
or yeah, or an amount of difficulty, or self sort of like, you know, getting down on the self. I don't want to say self-hatred, but just being like self-confusion, or self, you know, just like getting into that really deep and broody like space with the pressure you put on yourself. I also just wanted to mention that Mercury, who's in the helm or in the first place, is a ruling that 10th house. So in that sense, they may have just a little bit more access to it. A little bit, it's like a little less dark. They might have a little bit more access to the 12th house. It just internally, right? An awareness of self in that sense, maybe.
I would say that's true. And I would say all of this has been really good and on point. And definitely the part about, like, I don't know too much about their father, but it's, I would say that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, good one.
One other thing with that sun that also kind of echoes what you were saying, David, is that it's applying to an opposition to Saturn as well. It's moving into that, and Saturn is also moving towards the sun. That being in the 6th house, which traditionally can rule health, indicates to me that some of this might have manifested for them in a physical ailment of some sort, due to whatever was going on with their sun.
For sure.
Maybe even
I think,
accidents.
yeah, I think the moon being in the whole sign opposition to Mars just is another testimony to that. In a, it's separating, which is better for the person, but there is that kind of sense of antagonism coming at them. And if we think about the 12th and the 6th also being associated with enemies, you see, there's that kind of like that struggle being, maybe going through either like that physical element, but also that that like more emotional and psychological element of the 12th house too. But then obviously people being antagonistic towards them and them having to struggle through that, just struggle being really like a big part of this chart, I think, just that word.
All the squares and oppositions, it just speaks to that.
Yeah, I would definitely say there's struggle. I'm not sure about, like, there definitely was physical illness. I just don't know like how much of it in their personal life. Like there was certainly one particular instance. Yeah.
And I want to say about that particular incident, I'm thinking either like a weird, terrible accident that happened to them and then hospitalized them in a like automobile accident or something like that. But also I was thinking of substance abuse or things like that, because Mars is maltreating the moon by opposition in a day chart, and that's the malefic contrary to the sect, maltreating the moon that signifies the body, not only because it's the moon, but also because it's the ruler of the first. And that moon is opposing also to that Jupiter. So to me, this means with the right weird activation of transits and timing, that this person could have that Saturn in the 6th with the South Node manifest at some very specific point in their life where an accident happens or that overdose happens, where they abuse something that was good for them. And for that reason, they might, get sick or consequences for a long time. Is that correct?
Yeah. I wish I knew if there was like a lot, I'm not sure what the story is around this particular ailment, or like how it like led into that ailment, but it definitely wasn't an accident from what I know. And I'm not sure just like what they struggled with health-wise, but like health and illness was a big topic in this person's life. Just, it doesn't seem apparent to me that it would have been, that severe. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I wonder.
I mean, the one thing they went through definitely was something you would consider like intense, but just not an accident or an automobile accident. Yeah.
I was thinking more because Jupiter in Aries.
Jupiter in Aries. Yeah. I was gonna say the same things you guys were saying. Just, I don't even know if it's like entirely psychological or anything, but just like physically putting themselves through, because you do have that moon Mars, do that Saturn Sun, and it's just intensified with the nodes there. And then I was like, dang, I thought about accidents, or just like if you are someone who's like, I'm not saying highly ambitious, like I have to start a company or something, but just very highly driven. Yes. You can like have all of these like basically burnout scenarios, and or just like, obviously, Lo, you mentioned it with like the psychological banter, of the 12th house and Saturn, but it's the sun and it's Sag. So it's like Jupiter and sun, but it's like, so like kind of this back and forth that can be hard on a person. And then I also wondered, David, the things you were saying about the person's health, I see the moon ruling the ascendant and the Mercury thing with the 3rd house that you were mentioning. Also though, the partner, right? And like other people's like finances. So I'm like, did the partner get hurt? Did they have constant like banter with the partner? Did they have to caretake for the partner in some way? Because we've got Saturn ruling the 7th, and then also the 8th. So like those kind of fears that come from the 8th house, or those just intensities that can happen with partnership, whether it's like the person's long-term partner or if it's just like their relationships in general. Taking and requiring a lot of work and a lot of that dynamic, that Saturn Sun dynamic, being sort of dragged up into the 7th house and 8th house.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So is this person's partner like a prominent part of the story that we're uncovering?
It was certainly a prominent part of their life. Yeah, like he would, I gendered the partner, but the partner.
We try not to gender the people before someone else does, but sometimes
you don't know the gender of the person,
Thank goodness, yeah.
The partner, yeah. The partner definitely was a prominent person in this person's life. And I mean, the story that you're unpacking with this person, I would say, yeah, they play a prominent role in their life, but I don't know about necessarily like their whole like the peak of what we're going for, but they were very important to them.
I want to ask also about their profession, because Jupiter rules the MC in the 9th house, and Jupiter is also angular in the 10th, being received by Mars. So I'm thinking Mercury is in the 1st, being the ruler of the 3rd. So I'm thinking maybe, if not published writer, a prominent teacher of some kind.
You could say that, but not a teacher in a sense that you are classically thinking, but certainly, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
I'm not
so,
like a super
Someone who actually speaks for people and spreads their own belief system and is followed for that in a way.
Yeah, it would be misleading to say it's like a real, like, I don't know, they definitely have that to them, but they're not known for that particular.
Okay.
Katie, go ahead.
I wasn't getting even despite having a water rising and a water MC, I'm not necessarily getting the sense of somebody who's super creative or like an artist necessarily, but somebody who uses their intellect more. Is that
It's funny
accurate?
you say that, Katie, because I was just about to say, are they an artist? Only because Mars is ruling the 10th and it's ruling the 5th, which could be a very strong, like, push your sort of creative, like, sense into the world, like, really. So funny. So this will be good that Sol answers this, because you're like, they're definitely not an artist. And I was like, are they an artist?
Shall
Let's
I
hear.
answer?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
They are an artist, but they are also one to use their intellect in quite a particular manner. So yeah.
Are they a writer?
They wrote, that was part of what they did.
Katie, I see you on the intellect though. I totally, I see you on that. But then they've got this creative wave, right? With the water ruled 9th house and the water ruled 5th house, like just with that, like Mars being super strong, like strong sexuality, strong. We already got the broodiness of this person and their partner, and it just gave me that feeling. And then we have Venus in domicile in the house of good spirit. So they have obviously fans and a network of support that really appreciates their work. I wouldn't say it has to be an artist, but like Venus in Taurus is very Venusian as well.
I was also looking at just being in the 11th house like that, and then ruling over the moon in Libra, much more of a social intellectual bent to what this person was doing. But I see artist very clearly now. So,
but definitely a social intellectual bent, definitely, yeah.
Well, the social intellectual bent you can also take from the moon in Spica. It's almost exactly on the star, which is a fixed star that's by that degree in the tropical zodiac. It's considered to be one of the luckiest stars in the zodiac. It can also confer some agitation also, I think, but it's one of the best stars to have. And it's also said to confer writing skills, very particular writing skills, or having an attractive writing style.
Definitely. Mercury in the helm as well. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
so that's
it just reinforces that, right?
They were an incredible writer. They were amazing, and they certainly were known for that, but it wasn't like the primary thing. It was like the thing that kind of helped them do what they did.
I also want to say something about like the fall from grace in career, maybe with the stars Aldebaran and Antares with the nodes there. Because it feels like there is some kind of eclipsy event that would have happened in their life involving their Sun and Saturn there, perhaps, or some transit of the nodes that were important through some angles combined with Saturn transits that might have offset whatever thing Mars is signifying in their 10th house, like problems with reputation and stuff.
Yeah, definitely like a controversial bent to this person, like and that, you know, informing somehow that like fall from grace, which definitely I think was most likely an event. But I think it's interesting to see how that Venus in the 11th is in aversion to both of the malefics. And the only bad thing that it has going for it is that it's in malefic terms, and it's really in the ascendant. It's in a good house, so definitely having those connections, especially if you're thinking artist within like the art world, and being able to access those kind of like even higher kind of class spaces, because obviously it's mostly rich people that get to be like famous artists. So having that those connections in the 11th, and being liked, and having that, which somehow kind of offsets some of that controversial Mars energy that's always going to want to break from what's expected of them in some way. So definitely that rebel kind of position, very prominent in the person, the way that the person is known, but then having those really good friends, really good people around that give them opportunities to be in spaces where they can be that Mars in the 10th house.
Yes.
But then that's somehow probably going bad for them at some point in their life with the stuff with the nodes and the Sun and Saturn, like David was saying.
I'm not sure what would have been their fall from grace, because I feel that this person is quite just like sort of collectively well liked. I could potentially not know something about that aspect of them, but they were very controversial in a very specific way. And so but it wouldn't have been sort of your typical fall from grace of like a scandal. I don't believe. Yeah.
We also don't see quote unquote like exalted planets, and a lot of times I use that fall from grace from the exaltation space. We see pretty domiciled stuff, but I agree that everywhere we're uncovering this testimony of like this controversy, and when you're controversial you sort of have that like dynamic. But it's good to know that they remained well liked, because I do see that sort of like moon in Libra, the Mercury in its joy. You're right, the malefics can't hit Venus. They're just like, she's in aversion. So that is speaking, but we do have this sort of like push and pull dynamic. And I feel like that Mars is kind of like big, and it's like YOLO. Like it's like, I'm doing this shit, like whether, can I swear? I don't even know.
Yeah, and it's that Jupiter, that David was saying right at the beginning of like Mars being that malefic, and obviously indicating those difficulties and that antagonism coming from like the public sphere. And then Jupiter stabilizing that, and maybe like smoothing out the rough edges, and giving them a sense of purpose, a sense of like, oh, but what they're doing is important. What they're doing is relevant to like a larger collective narrative. They're like entering within like a whole, into something that's bigger than them, which is that Jupiterian quality. So having that affirmed, that Mars is affirmed by Jupiter and said, no, what you're doing is legit, like you should continue. Like
and Jupiter rules the 6th house, as we always discuss in our groups as well. The 6th house has this thing about feeling marginalized or marginalized individuals and groups. And Saturn there also might speak to that characteristic of people that this person is associating with, because they feel they need to vouch for them. Like there is this Jupiter in this person's 10th house, as if they are vouching for those 6th house people. They're representing those 6th house people. That's Saturn there as well. It feels like that kind of, I am the support or the opinion that's going to disrupt your vision about these people you oppress, about these people you persecute, which is Saturnian things in the 6th house.
Oh, that was very them.
And I was going to say to Lo, when you started riffing and David's riff, I got this like giving voice to the people kind of thing. Like I speak for the people. That's that vindication that you were talking about with the sort of like malefic Mars and Jupiter Lo. Well, we've all been talking about, but when you were riffing on that, I was like, oh, the moon, the collective, Mercury in its joy, being ruled by the moon, which is like taking care of. And then that Mars just being like, and the Sagittarius, Jupiter aspects you were just talking about, David, of like giving voice to the people and being very vindicated for it. Like, I speak for the people. That's like the kind of like slogan I feel like could sort of be oozing from their pores.
Well, in general, I see a lot of, so the only personal planets that are in the more feminine or yin signs are Venus and Mercury. Everything else is in very yang, also vocal signs, right? So I see that voice being very strong explicitly. And it does make me wonder, again, going back to what their actual career was, being a wonderful writer, but was there also a vocal part of their career and art as well?
Definitely a vocal part.
Katie, with what you were mentioning of Venus and Mercury, both of them are Mars terms, isn't it? And it's censoring, tying back to that Mars in the 10th house being prominent in this person's discourse. There is this thing about the 5th house also, and Mars is ruled by the 5th, is Mars ruling the 5th as well, that you identify yourself with things from the 5th house because they are things that are going to give support to your 4th house, which is your base, which is your emotional, the place you need to go when you need to take care of your emotional state and reflect. It needs to be stable. It needs to be well-grounded. And the 5th house is the things that you identify with within that 4th house space that give it validity in a way. So this person felt very uncomfortable, and they themselves might have been rejected or marginalized. So they would feel these people they defend in a more personal sense. They might have been like rejected from their homeland. They might have been exiled because of war or things like that, because that's Mars.
They were.
And there's a lot of Mars. So it was because of war?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So they did fly away from their country. They had to go.
They did have to relocate. Mm-hmm.
Relocate because of war.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Interesting. So they were a political voice. They were becoming a political voice as an artist in a time of oppressive system, increasingly oppressive system. Okay.
They most certainly were. They were also sort of subtly so it wasn't like this overt, well, I mean, they were direct about it. So yeah, it's just maybe not.
They were kind of direct, but they also did something very specific that helped people during that time of war that the state he was in didn't like, and then he had to run away.
He or she?
I wouldn't say they had to
Them.
run away.
Yeah, sorry.
And I would say it wasn't, their work wasn't just about war, I would say, but a lot of it, there was a lot of politics in their work for sure.
Yeah, definitely, like homeland, roots, ancestry, where they came from, all of those things being very important, because obviously, just a moon ruled ascendant, but also the moon in the 4th house. And I think that I was thinking about this, and then you kind of like mentioned it. So just that that opposition between the moon and the Aries things in the 10th, like this Cancer rising with the Libra moon, and then the Venus in Taurus is going to try to be very subtle, very quiet, very not necessarily the loudest presence in the room. Is going to want to be more, especially with the 4th house emphasis, like wanting to be more focused on the internal, and not necessarily in such a public arena. So it kind of feels like there's that tension between what they're called to do and what they're called to say, because of maybe those circumstances that they were involved in that maybe forces them into a place of activism or something like that, or just like making art about something that needs to be talked about just because of the fact that people don't see it and the system and everything. So I think that duality is very, very important in like the person's personality, and having that, because Cancer rising is going to be very gentle, very, I can imagine them being very like isolated in like a studio, and then producing this really intense work that then gets exhibited or something, or something like that maybe has that duality of it being very loud, very aggressive, but being produced in a very subjective space, in a very internal space.
Yeah, Lo, I really like that. And I was sort of, while you were talking and before too, when we were like, okay, so what do they really, what do they do besides writing? And I was like, maybe it's a painter, because I was looking at that Venus in Taurus, which can be a little bit more tactile than like Venus in Libra, where that's maybe more sophisticated or refined or something like this, like, modern art or something like this. And then I was like, vocal also, right? Like I was like, is this person, I was gonna guess, is this person a painter? But now I'm like, maybe they're a singer. Maybe they're like got this like beautiful sort of like feminine quality that they can bring through with their voice, but because of that platform, they can say things, that would allude to. I'm really wanting to get down to the brass tacks of like what they did besides writing is what I'm thinking,
Right. They're not a singer and they're not a painter, but I would say they harnessed quite a few mediums. But there is like one very, very particular thing that they're known for.
Yeah, Lo, when you were saying a studio with the fourth house moon, that's why I was like, oh, those feminine qualities you were mentioning, Katie. And then I was like, they had this subtle refined. I was like, maybe their voice has less to do with like, I'm out here in these streets. Like, it's more like coming through in this Venusian way. And I really guessed it because of the moon in the fourth house, the studio thing, and then the vocal aspects of Mercury being in the moon's sign.
I think they might be I think they could be also an actor.
They did act a little bit, but that wouldn't have been
the primary.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think they would have considered it acting so much as, something that they would occasionally
feature, like maybe they'd feature on film or something.
Yeah.
Were they a show host? Sorry.
That's an interesting question. No.
Okay. I'm done with my mercurial significations.
Yeah, I was also.
Are they like a performer? Are they like into performance art or something like that?
You could call it. It could get close to that, but no, not exactly.
Are they? So it's kind of like is it like something digital, something that has to do with media, maybe film, documentary, something like that?
It's film, yeah.
I was gonna say we got the MC in Pisces, y'all. That's
also, are they a director?
They're a director.
Nice.
Oh, that makes sense.
Nice.
Definitely a director.
Yeah, look at that, Mars directing.
Mars and Jupiter, right? In the 10th. It makes total sense.
Perfect.
He's the one doing, I'm not sure if it's a he, but they're the one doing the casting and doing you do this, you do that. It makes much more sense with Aries, all the Aries energy, yeah.
Yeah.
How directors are like, cut, like Mars.
Yeah.
A lot of the filmic language is actually very Marsy, shooting and cutting and
Yeah, and then
action,
with Jupiter,
cut.
just like seeing Jupiter's ruling, right, the 9th house with the MC there. And it's like directors really have to have like a big zoomed out vision. And they also really have to be able to tell people like, no, this is what I want because this is the vision. And they really have to be like really strong Aries to sort of like get that. And I hear about that a lot with the directors, how they're just more difficult because they have this bigger vision and that they have to just sort of execute, which is that Mars. But then also Mercury, in the helm, like really having to pay attention to details as well to sort of get this ultimate product that or not even product, but this vision, this artistic sort of like the way you see it being put into the world that you're happy with,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Whoa, nice one, guys. Should we keep going a little bit?
Yeah, maybe now that you know what they do, you could get a little bit more into their style a little bit, or you could go elsewhere too, but that would be maybe cool.
I want to mention the square to the applying square to the midheaven from Saturn. It's like mutually applying and it's very tight. So I would suppose that there is like also Mars. So that could be horror themed films and gruesome, like, or documentaries about harsh realities, right? Documentaries, I think also. Is it?
They did a mixture of documentary and other types of fiction, but they definitely had subjects that were controversial or just like not even necessarily controversial to be controversial, but they just wanted to put that stuff on screen and they wanted to show people the realities. And so I guess you all kind of also touched a bit on their style already, just from talking about the subtlety and in combination with that desire to bring the people forward, that's a huge part of their work.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
I
and I
was just
mean,
thinking like definitely aesthetically pleasing in terms of the moon and Venus. So like very strong focus on like cinematography, like just making it like have an atmosphere and just making it
The
really,
color palette.
yeah, like just really having that down. But then I really hear you in the, I'm just imagining something really intimate, like maybe with people that go through these, like, I don't know, I'm just thinking like of a documentary, maybe like interviews with people who go through like wars, that are in war zones, and just having that like connection with just that Venus and the moon and stuff, but within like a really Martian environment. Or the opposite as well. So, you know, having that duality be present somehow.
yeah,
Yeah.
Lo, totally. And look at like, if you look at Jupiter ruling the ninth, which is kind of just like maybe foreign lands, foreign travels, like maybe it even represents like where they had gotten exiled from, like, or had to live outside of their country or foreign country, that kind of dynamic. And then Saturn also being ruled by that Jupiter, which is saying like, you know, the disenfranchised or the kicked out or the lesser seen, and let Jupiter even almost spiritualizing that struggle because it is the ninth house and because it's that sort of laborious sixth house of like the underrepresented and the downtrodden, and, you know, really having like being super convicted about that, showing that, I guess, that Mars, like, look how bad it is, see it with your eyes, like see the violence, or, you know.
Was this person also strongly involved in charities and philanthropy?
You know, I don't really know. But I would say that without explicitly saying so, that their life was kind of about that intimacy, and not even like, I don't know, I feel like they would have never even fully spoken about it in that way, that it was charity, or that it was this sort of, because then it sort of becomes a little bit pitying or something, because their work really was just like people
Yeah.
and being close to people and their experiences. So in a way, they really touched people in this really profound manner that almost feels like, okay, like they're giving so much, but they wouldn't have thought about it that way, maybe themselves. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Which is interesting because Sun in the 12th, right?
Yeah,
Sorry.
well, actually, I was going to say, David, exactly that. It's interesting because with the Sun in the 12th ruling the second and a Cancer rising, I would have assumed that maybe, yeah, it's somebody who did give money towards causes and had a compassionate bent towards people. But with the Sun in the 12th, it's like not necessarily wanting to be acknowledged for it, or not necessarily wanting to have that visibly related to, yeah, their overall actions. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're natural. They don't want to be seen as philanthropic. They're actually like in it.
Did they lose a lot of money, the partner? Did they have like a financial like loss of any kind?
I don't know too much about the partner, but I don't believe so.
Yeah, I mean, it could be also the person themselves, as the ruler of the second is the Sun in the 12th opposite Saturn. So yeah, I guess it's just that fall from grace element just coming through. Just
Yeah, I'm not terribly certain about anything financially with them, but it's interesting, the concept of fall from grace, because I thought of it initially in regards to sort of their reputation, but when you look at the partner, there was actually a fall from grace. It just wasn't exactly a scandal. Yeah.
Interesting. Uh-huh.
And we talked earlier about the sort of health and ailment situation with Saturn, so that's a good direction to go.
Did they die young?
The partner, I like relatively young, like not too young, but yeah, I would say young for.
The partner died.
Mhm.
I also was wondering, I mean, I'm not good at like David is, like seeing the planets and knowing like what time frame this happened, but this is kind of an afterthought because I forgot to mention it earlier, but if the person was still alive, they would be having some mega eclipses at the moment. And I was like, whoa, but I'm not sure if that's relevant, but it's interesting. Okay, so the partner did end up dying relatively young.
I just thought of, just so you know, Elsa, when I do these kinds of omens, like when I see these kinds of omens, it's just because I'm seeing Saturn in a bad house, and in a lucky, quote unquote, sign, because it's ruled by Jupiter, and that's a very jovial planet and jovial sign. Whenever I see Jupiter signs, and Mercury signs, I immediately think of younger people, or at least people who have that youth to them. And Saturn in a youthful sign, perhaps someone dying in the prime of their youth in terms of images being manifested. And in this case, it's the partner because it's the ruler of the 7th, but I thought it would be the native because of the nature of the 6th being the native's own health sometimes. But I suppose it makes sense being the partner as well.
Yeah, I was right away, I was kind of like, with a partner as well. I like that delineation, David. Thanks for breaking it down. I like it when we break down why we're doing our guesses too. That's like one of my favorite ways to like go about it and learn. But yeah, with Saturn just ruling the 7th house and being in the 6th, and then also ruling the 8th, just like the house of fear of death and perhaps death, So it makes a lot of sense that maybe the partner passed before they were ready or before the native was ready, because the partner probably brought a lot of good luck and fortune and stuff into their lives. So, maybe if they weren't super, super youthful, like you were saying, with the jovial nature, at least it would have felt like they were still bringing love and good fortune into the native's life, and probably would have been pretty painful.
Yeah.
You have that eclipsing quality of the nodes. Is there when you're looking at the astrology chart, you should look at as many confirmations of the thing you're trying to validate in the narrative to see if it's true as possible. And in this case, we see several death significators connected with that particular topic of relationships in this person's life, because of the maleficence of Saturn, 6th house, South Node.
Did they develop like a chronic disease, something that debilitated them physically over time, that really limited the partner, like the native in this case?
Yeah, the partner did.
Yeah.
Maybe going.
Yeah, but did it have like a big impact on the native? I mean, obviously it would because it's their partner, but just like in terms of limiting them and having to force them into, like more of a caretaker role, something like that.
It was like a sort of slow and like, I don't know if it would be considered chronic, but definitely like a chronic process. Like
it was a process that developed through time, but it's like a disease, perhaps, that once you catch it, it slowly kills you. It's not exactly a chronic disease. It's an ailment that will certainly kill you.
And then also the bones or the marrow or something like that. Also, something super rooted and deep.
Did they die from the same illness as their partner?
That's really interesting. But no.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. It's interesting.
Whoa, this is like, nuanced.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of nuance here.
My curiosity is starting to get.
I know, maybe we should reveal, because
we can reveal.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
I think we should, because I have like a lot of information on them, so maybe I can
go for it.
Yeah,
let's unpack it nice and slow and talk about the significations as you sort of reveal the story, and we can get into the nuance, and that'll be fun.
So this is the chart of Agnes Varda. So all the information that I grabbed for this, I got from either her autobiographical film called Beaches of Agnes, and I also got from some information from this book called Agnes Varda, Between Film, Photography, and Art. It's a book by Rebecca J. DeRue. I just wanted to quote her because some of the things are directly from her. And she was a Belgian-born French filmmaker, director, screenwriter, photographer, and artist. And her legacy involved being a pivotal figure in the development of the French New Wave film movement. And it was crazy because you said the word wave, Elsa, earlier. But it was literally, it was literally called that, the French New Wave film movement in the 50s and 60s. which was a movement that had a lot to do with rejecting traditional filmmaking conventions in favor of experimentation in like every possible way. You know, form was a lot of it, like, you know, editing differently, and visually the storytelling was very different, and just kind of sort of in that Mars way, disrupting what had been before and these conventions and these standards. And she was one of the major catalysts of this movement. And she explicitly and also subtly discussed feminist politics in her work, and was even proclaimed to be the mother of the New Wave film movement. And
The
yet,
mother,
yeah,
oh my
the mother.
God, the mother.
Yeah.
I love that.
It's so wild. And yet her works also kind of were like, they cusped, or like they bookended this movement. Like she a lot of her work, and she was very prolific, happened sort of before and after, or afterwards, I would say, because the work before was the thing that like sort of catalyzed her into this generation. So it's interesting because she was really the only female filmmaker from this generation to achieve such broad recognition. And in another way, so in one way, she was like a part of it and sort of like helped to create it, but it was this like world of men. And so in another way, she was like, her accolades were rendered to be quite like gender dependent. And so she was always sort of fringy, and still is, because it's like her work is really revered and she's really revered, but she's also not, you know, like all over the place, or like she's not like completely well known. So she has this liminality to her for sure, and is often spoken about on her own and independently from this generation, because of the fact that she was a woman, and also because her work was just completely original. Like, I mean, it just was so different from even the stuff that was happening in that very movement.
It's so funny, none of us guessed photography with sun in the 12th house and the moon in the 4th house with like the dark room or whatever. We went there low with the studio, right? But like the dark room and photography, that
Exactly.
dark image or whatever, playing with the light to get the colors to sort of develop or whatever. That's so sun in the 12th, moon in the 4th.
She said like the years that she did photography were just like extremely dark and isolating and difficult and lonely, and like, so she was a photographer for a really long time actually, and then just like decided she wanted to make a film and had absolutely no experience. She had seen like 10 films by the time she was 25, she said. And so people were extremely baffled, and like critics were just like, who's this person trying to make these films? But just had such a fresh like way of coming to this medium, because she just like, she even said at some point, like, I never felt I didn't have the right to do this, right? And that is just like this big, that's a big deal in a world full of
That Aries, right?
directors. Yeah, it's like all that Aries, that Mars.
Feeling that you're allowed to do the thing that you wish for, and just going and doing it because you don't even see the limitation. That's why it's also
kind
the
of a
policy.
primal.
The Jupiter.
The Jupiter,
Yeah, and the Jupiter just validates that. Yeah, it just
Yeah.
confers that Mars the power it needs in its home to be recognized and to fully manifest as being bona fide by the benefic of the sect. The promises of that 10th house in a good shape for the native.
just like I have the right because I exist. It's like in Aries, right? So it's just like I have just claiming space in that way. Like I have the right to just be about, like, just when someone phrases it, I have the right to. It's like this claiming. It's like, you know, it's very.
It's the exaltation of the sun, right? You just claim through your actions your entitlement. You don't even have to say it.
It's like a birthright vibe. It's just like I'm born. I've got I claim this like action. Yeah.
She was born under just past a first quarter moon, you know, classically indicating the, you know, individuation building of something. So her being kind of a trendsetter or a frontiers person.
Cardinality also, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just like this thing that just came through her, just to like, she didn't even realize she was going to be a trendsetter, you know, and it just happened that way.
I wanted to mention earlier, just tying back to something you just said, a while back, the isolation that she felt when she was doing the art thing. I don't think it just comes from the 12th house. It doesn't only come from the 12th house. I think it comes from the fact that Venus is ruling that moon in Spica, and Venus is also under the beams of the sun. It's not yet combust, but going for combustion pretty shortly. And it's already under the beams of the sun, which means it's invisible. And even though it's in domicile, which means she was doing something for which she was going to be recognized, it's artistic. People really gave it a thumbs up. If you guys get the subliminal message here. But the thing is that Venus is not visible. So you would expect that kind of isolation also to be seen through that placement under the beams.
So in her own words, she said she grew up in a time when Europe was ablazed and embattled because it was in the backdrop of World War II, or World War II rather, was really happening at the time, and she was right in the thick of it. And so she lived in occupied France after she relocated from Belgium. And she described herself as nervous, reserved, insecure, and intimidated by everything, which is just an interesting contrast to that sense of like feeling like I didn't have the right, you know? And that gives you that 12th house color there. And she also said, as a teenager, I'd daydream. I'd imagine joining a circus. Reality meant little to me, and I knew nothing about life. I didn't ask questions, which I find really just like wild for Gemini sun, but obviously in the 12th. And it's interesting because basically all her films feel like they pose questions, you know, that's what like the style of what she does feels like. So you have this interesting mercurial sort of duality all the time in the way she speaks and then sort of what she does. Like, for example, she's very criticized for being nostalgic, or not very criticized, but her critics would say she's nostalgic and precious. But she herself says she's not nostalgic at all about her childhood or anything that really happened to her when she was a child. And yet all her films are about looking into the past, recreating scenes from experiences she's had, and making work about all her friends who passed away and were, a lot of them died from AIDS, and that was also what her partner died from, which was a really taboo thing to even talk about at the time. And so what was interesting, David, actually was that at first when he passed, they said it was cancer, and she ultimately ended up dying very late in her life, in her 90s, of cancer. So it's like funny because if it actually had been cancer, they would have died of the same thing. But then later it came out that he actually died from AIDS because they didn't really talk about it so publicly in the time that he passed. Another thing would be she grew up near beaches and always returned to water. So like tons of her like story and filmmaking just have to do with being by the sea, being sort of in these fishermen towns. She knew how to mend nets and just had this sort of like strong relationship to water and beaches.
Can I say a few things with the last block of things that you said?
Yeah, please.
I love the mercurial parts and remembering the past and trying to make like new collages with film of what you experienced in your past. This is so Mercury in Cancer in the verse, like it's what she's known primarily for.
But then also in aversion to the sun, right?
Yeah, like, and also, the sun in the 12th also has this throwback memory, you know, like a throwback characteristic, very nostalgic. But what I wanted to say also is Saturn is squaring that MC, which is in a water sign. She has a water rising sign with Mercury there in the mute sign. And Saturn has to do with oceans. Saturn has to do with water, with fishermen particularly, and people who work by water and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's perfect.
I also found that Saturn interesting when they're like, your work's really nostalgic and stuff. And she's like, no, it's not. Like, whatever. And I just feel like that's such like and the fact that she never asked questions, she said, which is kind of like a Jupiter, Saturn. I mean, I know we got Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, but it kind of feels like if Jupiter were the big picture teacher asking questions, or even Mercury with its like Gemini curiosity and everything, but Saturn just being like, no, it's not nostalgic, and no, I don't ask questions. Also a Jupiter thing of kind of maybe being like, not like a know-it-all or something, but like just acting, and not like with the Mars, like just like acting into it and like posing questions, but not like asking them to others, just kind of being in that space of like, maybe she's not, I already know, but she's like, no, it's not nostalgic. And also, no, I don't ask questions, but you're like, your movies were asking questions, and everybody's like, they're really nostalgic. And I just think that that's funny that she sort of didn't see it, Sun in the 12th, and also just negated it with that sort of Saturn vibe,
Yeah, because she was, in every sense of the word, just resistant of what anybody wanted to pin her down to be. And even her filmmaking is just like really hard to categorize. Like all of it's just, I'll give you a couple examples of her work, but it's almost like she just evaded every space that someone tried to like block her into, just in this really elegant, like eloquent, but also very mercurial way. It's like she always kind of like was flowing in and out of things that she was feeling, but like had a logic to it that was just like very simple, and yet like, I don't know, it just like hit in the right way. So yeah, she was really good at sort of doing this one thing and then being like people would see it in a certain light, and then she would just sort of not abide by that. As
contrarian, it's contrarian. It's like it defines itself by everything it's not, right? And that's a very kind of Saturn opposition vibe.
Yeah. A couple more things. So she was known for her communication style. Her communication style was very matter of fact, and yet everything also had this like air of romanticism to it, just like I was saying about the nostalgic stuff. She sort of had this like cryptic way of speaking, and yet she was really blunt. And it's so that's like another sort of thing for what we were just saying. She also, let's see, her films were thought of as radically personal. She loved coincidence and like small funny moments, and was deeply fascinated in neighborhoods and cities and little interactions. And she had this incredible insight into these little scenarios by being really observant and also somewhat voyeuristic in this really caring way. And so sort of like she would use these huge topics, and she would use these small gestures to talk about these like massive topics like loss and war and like gender dynamics and like domestic labor and illness. Like one of the biggest films that basically like catalyzed her into this new wave movement had to do with a woman who was really scared that she had cancer. And she was, it's sort of that eighth house fear and anxiety that was sort of pouring through the film. It's really good. It's called Cleo from 5 to 7. And it has actually some astrological stuff in it too, which is really interesting. It's just like there's a mention of that day being, she says like, one of the characters says, oh, today is the day when Gemini, the sun goes from Gemini to Cancer. So she had, I think, a little bit of astrological liking, perhaps. One of the projects that I thought was really interesting was to really exemplify her, like for her first film ever, she had a friend who was involved in some of the test shoots, and he died before the film was finished. Yet again, another friend who dies. And so years later, she invited his sons to participate in an art installation or an art piece. And they had never ever seen footage of their father before. They'd only seen photographs. And so in the piece, they pushed this giant hand cart through the same town in which that test footage was shot. And on the cart itself was a screen with the footage of their father playing so they could watch as they pushed the handcart through the town. And it was just this like beautiful sort of weaving together of like all these mediums to create this experience that was really emotional, but like also very confrontational. And so she did a lot of work like that, that was just sort of looking at people and just drawing out exactly, they didn't have anything necessarily powerful about them. Like she even said, I don't love to shoot or like do films about people of power. Like I really just think normal people need to be heard. Another really funny one is she shot this movie on the street she lived on her whole, or the street that she lived on. I don't know how long she lived on it, but she shot the whole neighborhood, or the whole block rather, because she had a child very recently and didn't want to go too far from her house. So she used that opportunity to film the baker and the cafe and the accordion seller and the clock person and the tailor and all these people. And she didn't want to use the electricity in each of their buildings. So she got this huge extension cord, and she only filmed up to the length that it allowed her, which was about 90 meters long. And it came out of the mail slot of her own house. And later someone heard about it and told her that she didn't want to cut the umbilical cord. And she was like, yeah, maybe they were right. So she and that whole retelling of the project itself, she put into another film where she was like reenacting the autobiography of her life, and like literally shot the scene and had this like giant extension cord as she was talking about it. Like it's very sort of meta. She's always sort of recreating and building off of these very real experiences and just gleaning all this meaning from the mundane. She also shot like in America. She had a trip to America and she shot like Black Panthers and protesters from Vietnam, and she made a film about murals and just like was interested in whatever just sort of called and was sort of political, really. I mean, a lot of this is political. It's about people.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this art that is kind of aggressively about something that's not the mainstream, like, just making, if you're used to films being very quick and very like action oriented and about people in power and stuff, and then you do something about very ordinary people in a very slow and experimental way, and it's all about those little details, then that's gonna feel like that confrontation still, because it is kind of affirming, this other way of doing this thing that was done in a very kind of, very just in a completely different way, and with different values as well. So like taking in that in order to do that, you need to have that kind of Mars like energy to push through the resistance of the people just being like, oh, what's the point of this kind of thing,
Absolutely. That's exactly.
And like all of this you guys have been describing about the controversy around her films and the filming of ordinary people, trying to show, and even like doing this part where the sons can play again with their dead father in this way. Like all these things, they are so Saturn squaring that midheaven, and at the same time you have that trine to the 10th house from Jupiter that rules the 6th. It's just like, you're trying to give form to and the space for these people to speak, to be heard. These people that are associated with the malefics because they have ignored lives, or these are ignored themes in society or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. There are a couple of like just really interesting notes. Like she said, for me, cinema, or there was this one like scene that she did in her autobiographical film where she like recreated this beach scene with like some kids, and then she like walks into the scene and she's like, I don't know what it means to recreate a scene like this. Do we relive the moment, And then she says, for me, it's cinema, it's a game. And she's just like standing in the shot, like with these kids, like recreating this photograph that she just showed you. And it's just like, she's talking about cinema. And like, that's a huge part of what she did, was like, what is this medium? And sort of questioned and challenged that. So, and then this other note in this same film, she talks about her father, and I couldn't really find anything else about her father, but she said, I lost my father in a casino. He played, he lost, he fell down, and he died. And that's like the extent of the information I know of him, besides the fact that he was of Greek ancestry and like never talked about it. But I thought that was poignant with the sun ruling the second there as well.
That's interesting that both of them have to do with games, and Mercury is the games.
Yeah.
Where she's like, cinema is a game to me, or like just, even if that's not how the father died, but the way she poetically like put it into this sort of like gaming atmosphere, this gambling and gaming.
Mm-hmm.
When was it that she passed away?
Oh, she passed away not too long ago. It was like only a couple of years ago or something, or maybe 2018 or 2019, I forget. But she was 90 something, early 90s. Yeah.
And she died with a bunch of transits through her seventh house, which is kind of death in ancient astrology in a way as well.
Would you like to see some photographs of her as the like a conclusion? These are just some screenshots from the film that I was talking about, Beaches of Agnes. And this is the moment she says that she's not nostalgic. And this is her in the little mirror on the beach. Some images of her using mirrors on the beach as a sort of fragmentation process. I thought that was really beautiful. Here's her doing a kind of reflecting where she's saying that she remembers reading on the banks, and then she like passes by, and this is like a young version of her, which is really sweet. And then here's her just kind of talking about this image that she took where she thought that she was really embarrassed that his hand was blurry. Under the tyranny of the sharp image, I felt my photo was an utter failure. And then she says, emotion is something you can't control. She's just so sweet and beautiful in that way.
Look at that piece she's wearing. Her necklace looks like a moon, like the eyes of the moon or something.
And then when that piece online, it's really beautiful. Yeah.
And doesn't it just look so lunar? And the mirrors on the beach, that's so lunar, because the moon just being like the mirror, the reflector.
And Venus, right?
And Venus, yeah, I was gonna say.
Venus
mirrors.
too, yeah.
Like moon Venus.
But on the beach, like it's so Cancerian. She's like, no, I'm not nostalgic. And she has like mirrors and photos like in the waves and everything. And you're like, okay, sure.
Look how round shaped her face is.
Mm-hmm.
Like lunar shaped face. Like this is Cancerian archetypal ascendant 101.
She even says, like she said in the beginning of this film, I'm playing the role of the little old lady who's pleasantly plump and talkative, telling the story of her life, and yet it's others I'm interested in. So it's just perfectly her chart. Here's her just giving flowers to the dead and then saying, naturally, I think of Jacques. All the dead lead me back to Jacques, her partner. This is them in this gorgeous image. This is her dressed as a potato, because she just loved to do like these little films about just things she liked. And this was just a film about potatoes. So this is showing you also just her like radical eccentricity. And then here's a beautiful project she did where she took a film that she thought was a flop and just made a room with it and said basically like, I've been living in cinema, it's my home.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Talk about embodying your art.
I know. And then these are just some images of her as a young person and much older. She had this interesting hair where it was half like, it's so crazy because it's like red and white, which are just like Mars and moon colors. And then it's in this dichotomy or juxtaposition, the way like Libra likes.
And And also the potato thing is almost like it's a very lunar food. Just being like very warm, very nourishing, just kind of like it has its basic sort of elemental nutrition to it.
But it's comforting. It's a
Comfort, yeah.
food.
Yeah.
That particular photo of the red glasses, that's so like
Yeah,
Moon,
yeah.
Mars. This is like white and red.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
So-
Mercury too.
yeah.
And Mercury too,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
With the hair as well.
Right. The multicolor.
Yeah.
I love this.
So that's her, Agnes Varda.
Oh, that's epic.
Thank you,
I'm
Sol.
so like, wow, thank you so much, Sol. This was
Of course,
really
it was really
fun.
fun. I'm so happy that you liked that one.
Yeah, it was really great. So we'll end here for this, I guess, portion, and all of our contacts and all that will either be in the about section or like in the links below. We'll make sure to follow up with you. So thanks all.